And I guess the ultimate question that you're probably thinking is, why on earth is a geographer talking to you and a thing that's about health? And I hope by the end you'll actually have some sense of why a geographer is talking to you and why geography might actually be useful and important. So what is health geography? Health geography is the use of geography to study disease, health, and healthcare. And the fundamental thing we're interested in is location or place or geography. So where you are, particularly where you live, but also where you work and where you do things. And the sort of things we're interested in are the distribution of diseases, illness, wellness, etc., but also the location and distribution of healthcare resources, so where we locate hospitals, where GPs and the like are. The other technology I want to introduce you to is a thing called GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. And that's a technical definition, but basically it's Google Maps on steroids. It's the ability to overlay maps on top of each other and ask a series of questions of all the maps. And that combination of GIS and health is what we call GeoHealth. And we use it to look at determinants of ill health, and we use it to look at the location and importance of location of healthcare services, things like hospitals. And the sort of studies people have used GeoHealth on, they include work on water and air pollution. But I'm not going to talk about them, because I'm going to talk about some things we've done in the GeoHealth lab that perhaps are maybe things you haven't thought about as much. The first one is green space. Does it matter whether you live near a park? Now, with parks and green space, there's two mechanisms. One is that you can access a park, because you can then get physical activity. And the other one is that you look out of the window and you see green, and it's good for your mental health. We've done research on both, but I'm going to start with some work looking at mental health. And with mental health, there's two types of green space. There's green space you can access, like the picture on the left, and there's green space that you can't access, so things like private space, farmland, etc. And is there a difference? And so what we do is we do a couple of things. The first thing we do is we get the home location of an individual for whom we have health data, and we put a circle around it, and we say how much green space is there in the vicinity of where you live. And we do it for two things. We do it for usable green space and unusable or non-usable green space. There's stuff you can see and stuff you can access. And the other thing we do is we then say how far is it if you want to access it. So how easy is it to get to? And you can see the example at the bottom where the total green space is very close, and that's indicated by the red line, and the usable green space is a bit further away. So you actually end up with a whole bunch of different metrics which are measures of accessibility to green space. And we did this research, and we found that decreased distance to green space, both usable green space and increased proportion of green space in the vicinity of where you live, were associated with decreased anxiety and mood disorder treatment counts. In other words, the more green space you have and the more green space in close proximity to you, the better for your health. What about blue space? What about living near the sea? Does that matter? The thing with blue space, we did this study in Wellington. We said, how much can you see from your home? Technically, that's really, really challenging, and I would utterly bore you if I tried to explain it. But the idea is you're saying, what can I see from a particular point? We did that in Wellington, and we found out that if you can see more blue space, you have decreased psychological distress, and that's all confounded. Everything we do is already controlled for confounders like socioeconomic status. So when you've controlled for that, you still have better mental health the more blue space you can see from where you live. Third one, what about living near traffic? Does it matter whether you live near traffic? Slightly different study. This is one done with a student, and this is the number of social connections people have when they live on busy streets. The next one is on moderate streets, and the third one is on light traffic streets. So basically what we see there is that people who live on lightly trafficked streets have much better social connections with their neighbours. What about, does it matter whether you live near alcohol outlets or gambling venues? And a very topical issue in Christchurch and many cities around the world. We looked at that one. This figure shows the median distance to the closest alcohol outlet by types of crime. So basically where it says on the right-hand side, the high crime, you've got much better access to alcohol outlets, and in areas of low crime, you've got worse access to alcohol outlets. And that remains when you control for socioeconomic status. In other words, if you live near places that sell alcohol, there's more violent crime. Oh, sorry, having greater geographic access to alcohol outlets was associated with increased levels of serious crime. What about living near a hospital? Does it matter whether you live near a hospital? We did one study looking at Healthline. Some of you may know the service where you can phone up and when you have something you're concerned about, and they tell you what to do. And the problem with that is that isn't easily linkable to whether you then do anything. So we had to statistically match people. So we said we assume you're the same person, if you're the same age, you live in the same address, and you're the same gender, and we assumed you're the same person. We then looked at the distance people were from the hospital, and then we said, did they do what they were told? Did they go to hospital when they were told, and did distance matter? What you find is only about 40% of people go to hospital when they're told to go to hospital. But if you live more than 40 kilometers away, you're only about 10% likely to do what you're told. In other words, where you live and how far you are from the hospital is as great a predictor of what you're going to do, whether you're going to go to hospital, as is what you are told to do. So geography matters, distance matters, the location of the hospital matters. Finally, what about earthquakes? We were less interested, I'm running out of time. We were less interested in the day of the earthquake. We said, what about the long-term impacts of the community you live in? So we decided to track people post-earthquake. So we tracked them from where they were on the day of the earthquake, we tracked them through the next few years, and we said, can you track backwards and come to some conclusions? Simply put, that graph shows that the people who left and came back in that middle period after the earthquakes, their mental health was much worse than the people who stayed where they were. Finally, increasingly geographers are tracking people over their life course, they're tracking them over their whole life and coming up with some really interesting findings. So the answer is geography matters and GIS can help. Boom.